and welcome back to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we are joined by a special guest, Dr. Alicia Hawley Bernardes.
Yes, good job.
Yes, and Alicia is a associate professor at Our Ladies of the
Of the Lake University.
University.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have a PhD in psychology,
Social work.
social work, and you are working on finishing your LCSW.
Yeah, I just started hours, the 2,000 hours that we need to work towards to get our LCSW. So I have my LMSW, so just working towards that next one. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah. And the practice that you're working in, what's the
Yeah.
name of that?
So it's inspired practice. And so we've got a lot of different clinicians, you know, remote telehealth therapy. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Just started it 2 months ago, so all pretty new to me, but I'm really loving what I'm doing. So it's really exciting.
And you're currently taking intakes, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I have about 4 or 5 clients right now on top of the full-time job. So,
Yeah.
doing, taking a few more as well. So
Fair
it's
enough.
good.
Yeah, so if you like what you hear tonight, you might want to jump on over there quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Valentine's Day is tomorrow, and we had spoken prior, and we're going to share with you guys a little bit tonight. I'm going to pick Alicia's brain here on intimate partner violence, and we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us. I know even as we sat down here tonight, we were already kind of teasing out what directions maybe, but why don't we start a little bit with like a generic definition, and just kind of you teach on this stuff, so we'll just kind of follow your direction and go from there.
Yeah. I was telling him pre-show that I need my PowerPoints to be able to go through, but the CDC defines it as verbal, emotional, physical abuse by a current or former partner or spouse. And so when I talk about it with my students, I usually break it into kind of the 3 different categories of emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. I'm not sure I said that one in the definition, but sexual abuse as well. And so I usually talk to students about those 3. And before I went to get my PhD, I worked as a clinician at a domestic violence agency where I did individual and group counseling. And so definitely got a lot of experience learning from survivors about their stories and hearing more about their experiences and what they go through in abusive relationships. So,
Yeah. When you're stepping into these environments to help remove some of the barriers to one, treat it, but also help individuals see what's going on, what are some of the biggest barriers that are presented in a clinical setting?
yeah, so one of the first things with a client is probably helping them to recognize what it is. Oftentimes they've heard about intimate partner violence. Oftentimes it's called domestic violence. But, they often think, oh, that's not me. That's not what I'm experiencing. I don't have, black eyes. I don't have any broken bones kind of thing. So it really takes a lot of educating them about emotional abuse, about verbal abuse. And then oftentimes we might have clients who will say there's 2 things that really stand out to me that I really try and educate them on. One is they will say things like, well, he only does this when he's drunk. And I take a step back and I say, okay, so walk me through this. When he is drinking, every time he gets drunk, does he, get abusive towards you? And oftentimes they might say yes. Say, okay, so every time when he goes out with his friends and he gets drunk, does he hit them? And oftentimes they'll say no. And so I said, okay, so if he's drunk with his friends and he doesn't hit them, and he's drunk with you and he does hit you, that's a conscious choice that they are making to not hit his friends and to hit you. The same thing can be applied when they say, oh, he just has an anger issue. He needs to go to anger management. And I will say, something along the lines of, okay, so if he is mad at his boss, does he hit his boss when he's angry? If he's mad at, the grocery store clerk, right? Does he hit them? And oftentimes the answer is no. Yeah. So that tells me that they do have control over when they're, not hitting their boss or their best friend and they are hitting you. And so it is a conscious choice that they're making. And I always say, don't get me wrong, there are people that do have anger management issues and they do hit their boss and they do hit, whoever. That's not to say that doesn't exist, but in most of the incidents that I work with people on, there is a choice. And so helping them come to terms with that can be really hard for them to have that realization. And I want to also preface this by saying that I will sometimes say he and she when I refer to victims or perpetrators, and I recognize that there are male survivors of intimate partner violence, and to some extent, I would say maybe even on the rise. 85% of survivors are females. Yeah. So that's kind of why I use some of that terminology.
Yeah. Just sheer statistically.
Right.
Yeah. It's, I tend to do that as well. Lean towards certain descriptors that fit the overall statistic.
Right.
I think that was an important distinction too, to break down that first doorway of defining the reality, because I think a lot of times, and this is one way I've always tried to conceptualize when I'm looking at domestic violence, is that has become the reality, and any attempt in the beginning to refute that is going to be met by defense if not challenged or confronted properly. And so I think that's a really important piece that you highlight of just the neutral ways of holding up, well, does he do this everywhere?
Well, and I think having that conversation with them, first of all, you have to have really good rapport with them before you have that conversation. Otherwise, they will get defensive and they will shut down. So I think that's one of the first things that's really important, is having that rapport. The other thing that I found is it can be really helpful to say those things in a group setting. So like survivors group kind of thing. Because I'm not calling out any one in particular person. I'm just kind of educating and talking to everyone about it. And so then they can think about it and process it kind of in their own time, and then see kind of how they feel about it going forward. Yeah. So
I've always found that helpful in group therapy too, of when it's coming from a peer as well, if I could enlist some of the health of the group over time to confront some of these things, especially when it's challenging somebody's reality.
Yeah, especially if it's a newer person to the group who maybe hasn't been around, or this is, one of their first few sessions kind of thing. It's not something that I would, call out on the first few individual sessions with them. It would be after I build rapport with them and have more of a relationship kind of thing. So I think for, another really a big barrier, you were asking about barriers, is the judgment from society. And so even, coming to therapy is a big step. Our society, this is a big pet peeve of mine. Our society also often asks, well, why does she stay in an abusive relationship? And that's very interesting question, because we as clinicians are taught that the why question can be a very blaming question. And so if society is saying, well, why are they staying in the relationship, that's blaming them for what's going on in the relationship, when we should be asking, why are they abusing? Or other things that we should ask or could ask is, what is keeping them in a relationship? I always tell my students when I teach this, leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for a survivor. And I will never tell someone to leave an abusive relationship. I can help them plan and prepare and do a safety plan so that they feel empowered to be able to leave if they decide that that's something they can do for their safety. But it is the most dangerous time for them. So I think we as a society really need to think about why we're saying why. Why are we putting the blame on the victim in this situation? So.
Yeah, I mean, such is the case with any stigma, right? It's like I think when I work with addicts, right, and the family members, there's a lot of if you spot it, you got it, right? And I think a lot of people don't want to confront the challenging ways. This would be a really kind of like meta way to look at it in society where I think a lot of people are afraid to look at the ways in which maybe their relationships are unhealthy, which adds to a stigma. Not saying that there's like just tons of people out there engaging in domestic violence, but some of the ways in which we would categorize domestic violence, there are a lot of relationships out there who've never looked at those aspects and probably are engaging in some of those. And I think unconsciously that feeds into a stigma, as well as just kind of the direct confrontation of like, I think, gosh, there's so many things to say about this, but confronting something so heinous in society and calling light to it has always been troublesome to society at large.
Yeah, it's almost like the don't air your dirty laundry and what happens behind closed doors, is not our business kind of thing. And I think the other thing is it is happening way more than we think. So when I first started teaching about it, the statistic was 1 in 4 women experience IPV in their lifetime, and it's now 1 in 3. And so we're learning a lot more about who's experiencing this and kind of the prevalence of it in society.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about a little bit the cycles that occur, right? Because these are important in the cycles of abuse to understand. What's important for those listening? Maybe they're kind of listening somewhere safe and they're going through something like this, or they've been through something like this and are seeking support now. What are some of the important pieces in the beginning of like, hey, you're looking to get out, you're looking to get educated on this? What are some of those first steps that are safe, but also just kind of like building blocks to start to move in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that's one of my things that I would do first and foremost is to talk with them about a safety plan, and what that looks like having a go bag. Either in the trunk of your car or at your work or at a friend's house. It would look like, making sure you have all of the important phone numbers written down. Back in the day, we had to memorize phone numbers, that we were calling. Well, now everything is on our cell phones. Well, what happens if you lose your phone or if he breaks your phone or if you don't have your phone? You might need to have phone numbers written down. And so either memorizing them or writing them down somewhere might be really important. As much as possible, having some money, whether it's, you squirrel away $5 every week and put that somewhere safe. I've known some survivors who have opened bank accounts and put, $20 a week. Just to have that sense of security. That is my biggest thing, is what will help you feel secure and have the ability to leave at the drop of a hat if you need to, and not have that stress and that anxiety about, well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I take? What do I don't take? Kind of thing. You don't have to worry about that. That'll be covered. You just have to worry about, am I going or not going? So having important numbers, extra medication, copies of important documents, these are just some things that I think of. The other thing that I always recommend is having some kind of code word. A lot of times survivors, they may not be able to make a call out to a friend, but if they can text the word, banana, that friend knows to call the police to that location. Or having a code word with someone could be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, which I think brings up the point too. A lot of times in cases like this, one of those first steps is getting ladies connected in community, like slowly over time in a way that can also be confidential, connected with safe women who understand how they're being affected.
Well, and that is one of the hardest things, because one of the things that a perpetrator, an abuser, slowly does over time is isolates them from people. So, and it starts out very subtly. Like you don't know, they don't know that it's happening often. They will go out with friends as a couple, when they first start dating and have a great time and, love going out with other friends. And then, a few weeks later, they might say like, "Oh, I want you all to myself tonight. Let's stay in." How sweet. Okay, fine by me. And then the next week, like, "Oh, didn't we have such a good time? Like, let's not go out with them again this week. Let's just stay in," kind of thing. And then the following week is, "Oh, I don't really like the way that she talked to me." And again, they're slowly isolating them from friends and family, so they don't go out as much. They don't talk to people as much. They move away from them. I mean, it's slowly happening over time. It's not something that happens instantaneously.
Yeah, it's in rare cases and pretty progressed, I would say, personality disorders where it can happen a little quicker.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think in these realms, you and I both know that a lot of times we're dealing with cluster B type stuff as well when we're stepping into these realms. For those who are not familiar with that, those are traditional kind of like narcissism, borderline, histrionics, those kind of personality disorders come together and find themselves in these dynamics.
Well, and I tell my students all the time, if you go on a date with someone and they slap you across the face at the end of the date, you're not going to go on a second date with them.
Yeah.
So this is, again, something they fell in love with that person. They fell in love with them in the dating process. And it's not something that happens right away. It's a slow progression that builds.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is where, like, when we look at it clinically, when it is personality disorders, a lot of it is like boom, 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 right? And what's funny is like some of those unhealthier dynamics, people can get out a lot quicker. Relatively speaking, it's still dangerous, obviously, and that can't be stressed enough. But when it's not a personality disorder structure and it's more of like really deep wounds within the family dynamic that have led to certain behaviors over long periods of time, and those dynamics that play out in the cycle of abuse.
Well, and the thing that I teach about is it's all about power and control. And so there's something called the power and control wheel that we go through that talks about ways that abusers exert power and control over a person. And that's done very slowly over time until it gets more and more intense with the cycle. So, yeah, I think it's, most of the time has to do with power and control. And when they're leaving an abusive relationship, the abuser is losing that power and control. And so they're more likely to have a strong reaction to that.
Yeah. I would imagine too, with teaching this stuff, the conversation comes up a lot of like, well, this is just codependency. I'm sure you've heard that a million times, because that does come up in the cycle of power and control, of course, but that's just one aspect. It's like a piece of bark on the tree.
Right. Yeah. I've had survivors who have said 90% of the relationship is phenomenal, right? 90% of their entire relationship is, flowers and date nights and, loving each other. And it's just that 10% they've said that is the abuse. And so, if you just have to put up with the 10%, right? So that's kind of, I don't know, one perspective.
Well, there's I'd be curious to hear your add-ons to this, or just even your perspectives on this. But it's the flip of the proper boundary within relationships, which is when something happens, it's a deal breaker. The question is, if this never changes at all, even a little bit, can I put up with this for the rest of my life? Versus, I'll just put up with the 10%, even though it's a deal breaker. It's like a perversion over time of that boundary that up front, I think we all know in our gut is like a big no-no.
Yeah, and then that boundary just keeps getting pushed more and more, and it's like, well, if and then also they become self-blaming. Well, if I hadn't, done this, then he wouldn't have done that, or oh, if I hadn't done this, and so that boundary is pushed, and it's self-blame, and so they accept that new boundary.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Compounded by what is mom going to think, and what are the family members going to say, and what are my friends going to think.
I had a survivor who went to her mom. This was many, many, many years ago. The police found her under the bed hiding, covered in blood, and she had gone to her mom, letting her mom know that, I need help, this is how he is. And her mom said, you made your bed, now you have to lie in it, and don't go around airing your dirty laundry. And so it's those kinds of family cycles, religious beliefs, societal stigmas that oftentimes keep them in relationships like that.
Yeah. And we obviously can think of the picture as we painted of like the physical things that happen. But you were touching on, and maybe it's worth here going a little bit deeper on like some of the non-physical forms of abuse that a lot of people would just kind of chalk up to like, well, maybe this will change, or maybe I can fix them, is the other kind of societal blanket statement that people use.
Yeah, so I tell this story to my students. A woman in group one time said, my broken bones will heal, my bruises will go away, but it's the emotional abuse that I will stick with me forever, because I have no self-esteem. My self-worth is nothing. If the person that you love more than anything in the world tells you that you're ugly and you're worthless and you will never find anyone else who will love you, if they say that every single day, it will get to you, and it's something that can take years and years to build back. Whereas again, a bruise or a broken bone, while that's terrible and horrible, they say it's nothing compared to the emotional abuse that they experience. And then the emotional abuse is also things that aren't criminally enforceable. I mean, that you can't arrest someone for calling, me worthless. I haven't looked into it recently. I need to look into it, but I think many years ago, I think it was the UK passed a law about emotional abuse, and there had to be a pattern of it, and you had to show how you had to prove that you were experiencing emotional abuse. So I'm not sure how it went, but they did make a law, a criminally enforceable law. So it's definitely something that but obviously with AI and everything that's going on these days, I can't imagine how you would be able to prove that in a court. But it's definitely something that when I go through the power and control wheel, I talk about, the coercion, the threats, the, again, emotional abuse, the financial abuse. All of these things are things that are not going to be criminally enforceable in any way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, down to some things that are, in other ways, in certain settings, could be criminally enforceable, like emotional blackmail. Right? You do that in a professional setting with the right amount of money, you're going to jail, right? But you do that in a relationship, and there's nothing anybody can do for you. And so, I think, as always, there's a hope in that, right? As long as we're willing to look at ourselves, there are those who can support us in getting out of these kind of situations. It's not that no one can support you. It's that you've got to be really tactful about the way that you go about it.
Well, and I think one of the things, too, that I've had a lot of students who have come up to me and said, my friend is going through this. What do I do? And that is an area where I think we really need to do some more advocacy, is educating bystanders and friends to be non-judgmental, right? To be open-minded. No matter how many times they go back, I will always be there for you, period. And it can be very frustrating for friends when they go back and go back and go back. And it's can be very disheartening, and that they're going to be hurt or whatnot. But if you approach it with a non-judgmental attitude, with I will be here for you no matter what attitude, that is what they need. Yeah, it's kind of the roots of detachment, right? I don't have to help fix or save this fellow adult who I love and care about if it's
a poor decision I think they're making, I can give them the dignity to do so. I talk with a lot of family members of alcoholics on that discussion. It's extremely important, right? Whether it's something that you deem is wrong, it really doesn't matter.
Right.
It's whether or not that other person is going to look for themselves and make adjustments in their own life. But we all need those connections either way. And this would be the same conversation of like, let's say like in my life, if I had someone who was struggling with an alcoholic in their life, I'm not going to go hang out with them and that person, right? So we want to keep ourselves safe as well while remaining connected to the person who's not that problem, right? So there's a lot of ways detachment can allow you to accomplish that without stepping in. I think what's interesting about it to your own cycle of power and control, right? You see that a lot in friendships where it's like this dual, everyone's trying to control this one person who's been identified. It's really, society's fascinating in that way.
Yeah. Makes for good therapy.
Yeah. It's always going to sprout itself up. So we have some of the verbal things that occur, the emotional manipulations that occurs. There more that we would say about that would be important to note within cycles of abuse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's usually what it starts with, is just kind of like backhanded comments or like, under their breath comments kind of thing. And it usually starts with a lot of that, and then escalates more and more. So that's unfortunately what they experience the most is that emotional and verbal abuse.
Yeah. I'm curious what you would say about this too, is like when I'm working with a young lady, and as I've shared with you, I work with a lot of people affected by the family disease of alcoholism. In the beginning of dating, it's always watching out for the butterflies and the anxieties in the way of intensity, right? So like if someone's love bombing you and getting you gifts and wanting to do all the fun things right away and introduce you to everybody and hop into the sack right away, these are all bad ideas, right? It's like a person really, you're only going to get to know their secretary, the front man, right? For like the first 6 months, and then the aliens come out, right? And it's like, you want to get to that point without all the intensity to know like, hey, I really am getting to know this person. I'm curious what you would.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think, there's a lot of red flags, and you list a lot of ones. I think the other thing too that a lot of survivors would say is that moment where they have you hooked. And the research supports this too. There's a moment in the relationship, and usually it's one of three things. It's when they have moved in together. It's very difficult to get out of that. When they get married, obviously very difficult, or when they get pregnant. All of those three times are instances where there is an escalation pretty quickly because they have that hook, they have that power and control on you, and now it's much more difficult for you to be able to leave.
Yeah, there's also, it's interesting because that's a lot of times when partners will relapse, because it's like, where are you going to go? Right. You have to deal with me too. It's a package deal.
Yeah.
It's interesting. These threads, they manifest from origins of wounds, and they can manifest in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's domestic violence, sometimes it's substance use, sometimes it's like a break into psychosis. I mean, there's a lot of ways, but these threads are pretty similar of like, once we're in, right, then we can start showing some real problems. It's real important to find yourself a healthy partner.
Yep.
To really vet them out.
Or a really good therapist to fix the problems. Yeah. I mean, I think it's also something that we see very intergenerationally as well. And so if a woman experiences this and has children, oftentimes I've heard them say in the group or an individual, well, he doesn't do anything to the children. And he's a great father, kind of thing. And so we have to sometimes talk with them about the cycle intergenerationally as well. Not just the cycle that happens within a relationship, but intergenerationally too. If they are seeing and witnessing violence and that becomes their norm, that is their social learning that they have experienced, and then they begin to accept that in a relationship,
Yeah.
in their relationship.
Yeah. Or manifest those behaviors themselves. Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing, and not I guess amazing, but I have to remind myself as well as my clients that children are sponges.
Uh-huh.
They have created all kinds of little narratives of the things that they've seen and witnessed, and they're always going to be doing that.
Well, I tell women when they're pregnant, right? I mean, there's so many different hormones with anxiety and stress and trauma. They know from in the womb, kind of thing, what's going on, and so that can manifest in a lot of different ways, even from being not even born yet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So we've referred to the cycle of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to go into a little bit of that and
Yeah.
just kind of give a rundown?
Yeah, so almost every relationship starts in a honeymoon phase, right? You're in a great relationship. You're going out on dates. You're learning about each other, and for a healthy relationship, that is maintained for a while, and then it shifts, but it shifts in a kind of plateau, and it just becomes a healthy relationship. But in an abusive relationship, there's a shift that happens, and the survivors describe it as I'm walking on eggshells. And usually it begins with, again, a lot of comments, and you're having to read their mood all of a sudden, and you don't know how they're going to react to things. You're not sure what their mood is going to be like. And so there's this walking on eggshells stage. And usually that can last a while. And I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if you're living in this kind of heightened trauma state of walking on eggshells for a long time, that can be pretty intense. And so then at some point there is an episode. And in the early beginning of a relationship, it's usually a fight, usually a verbal fight. And it usually ends with, well, if you hadn't done this, this, and this, then I wouldn't have reacted this way. Or, you always do this and it makes me mad or something. And then there's, the blame and I shouldn't have done that. And again, it could just be a verbal fight. So then it goes into the honeymoon phase where I'm so sorry, I won't talk to you like that again. Please forgive me. Let's go out on a date. Here's some flowers, kind of thing. Then they're in the honeymoon phase. So then that cycle starts again, the honeymoon phase. And then again, something happens. They're reading the mood, and the mood shifts, and they're walking on eggshells again. And then it will lead to another episode. And usually, as the cycle progresses throughout the relationship, we have found that usually the honeymoon stages get shorter and shorter, and the episodes, the violent episodes, get more and more intense. So instead of just, yelling match or fighting, it's he's hitting a wall, or throwing something at them, kind of thing. And so the episode increases more and more. And then it's the honeymoon phase again. And I'm so sorry, I want to change. The promises to change. The promises to go to therapy and together and to work on this. And that's the honeymoon phase again for a really good time, right? Yeah. And women, survivors have said, I live for the honeymoon stages, right? Sure. And it's a great time. But then there's a shift again. And so the cycle goes on. And again, the honeymoon stage gets shorter and shorter oftentimes, and the episodes of violence get more intense each time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and this is, I think it's an important one to zone in on as well for a lot of different reasons, because maybe people are listening to this and they think they're sitting there listening to it and saying, I've done those things, all right? Now, I share this with my clients too, and this is something I've learned in the development of being a man and sitting with my emotions in a healthy way and admitting faults in a relationship and being softer is the repair is not an empty platitude. It's not an empty apology that doesn't mean anything. Oftentimes it's showing with the actions, right? And by those points too, I think it's important for a lot of young men and women to know too, like your your partner is going to be able to see those actions. They already know, right, that you can repair things. Um, those are important distinctions to make that you may have moments, right? Because some of the arguments and fights can be um, very similar, even in these domestic violence relationships, where I think it's important to distinguish that for people who are listening that don't experience that amends that happens.
Right.
Right? It's always important, right? Watch the feet, not the mouth. Right? They
What do
can
they
say
do?
whatever they want.
Yeah.
Right? But are they cleaning things up? Are they taking accountability for those actions? Because a lot of people can get caught in a moment where they feel less than and lash out. But how quickly are they kind of bouncing back and cleaning those things up and treating you properly consistently? You know?
And then maintaining that over
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Which is a good indicator too that somebody is in a relatively healthy place if they can maintain it because this pattern has a way. It's why we call it a pattern.
Yeah.
Those moments you were talking about, those little clicks. It's like when we get in there. Let's say we were working with an abuser, and I've worked with a lot of men in my career, and there's quite a few of those that have come across. Like the patterns of those clicks in them are usually pretty identifiable with family of origin wounds. She did something, remind him of mom and the way that he was abused by mom, and boom, and it could have been you were making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It really doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's batterers intervention programs for abusers. And one of the things that they really have to work with, abusers, perpetrators on is recognizing that it's a conscious choice and a decision that they're making. Regardless of, family of origin and history, it's in that moment, it's a decision that they make. And so having to confront that and make the changes necessary and recognizing the choices that they're making to really, work towards stopping that cyclical behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. Family of origin work is kind of like it's a privileged seat to be in, right? When you get to that point to be able to do that in-depth work. But if you're punching holes in walls and hitting people, there really is only one solution in the beginning, and that's to take accountability for the fact that you're treating yourself and others poorly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if that accountability piece is not there, if they're still blaming the alcohol or blaming their anger, blaming the person, any other excuses, that accountability piece is so crucial. I think not only for the survivor, but not only for the perpetrator, but I think for the survivor too. I think they need to see that they know that they're taking responsibility and being accountable to their actions.
Yeah, well, such is the case, I think, in any relationship. If there's no accountability, there is no repair. There is no foundation, which a lot of times is what I've seen the survivors find that helps them get out is like, I can't go back anymore because there's nowhere to land.
Yeah.
Every time that this has come up, there's a complete denial of what I'm starting to see as my reality, and that's a lot of times the clarity I see with people that have removed themselves from it.
Yeah. Well, and then thinking about this makes me think about it from a parenting perspective as well. The repair, anytime a healthy couple has an argument, and their kids overhear it, we oftentimes, the kids might hear the argument before they're sent to their room or whatever. Again, even if it's a healthy argument, you're having debate, having a discussion, heated discussion, let's call it, but they don't see that repair afterwards. And so being intentional about modeling that repair in front of the kids so that they see what repair looks like, what healthy repair looks like, and hopefully that modeling it helps them to understand that this is how we're supposed to repair things after we have a fight with someone.
Yeah. And that's, a lot of times with these perpetuated problems that seem to be on the rise. Um, we can often look at many, many factors that impact these things, especially in recent years and a lot of turmoil. But there's a lot to be said for parents learning this information, implementing these things to get in front of it for real changes to occur.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're wanting to kind of break the generational cycle of this abuse, and working towards some of that family of origin trauma, and there's people that are learning more and more about where their behaviors came from. And I think that is something that's wonderful that has come out in recent, years, decades, I don't know, that people are starting to do that generational trauma work.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, such as the stigma with domestic violence, similarly to trauma, right? I mean, the general belief of, oh, trauma is like if I went to war, I've seen someone die in front of me. And it's like, well, those are traumatic extremely, and probably some of the most brutal forms, but there are a million different forms of this conversation that we're having emotionally, spiritually, physically, and otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is another, it's interesting. We had all those documentaries come out and stuff about different religious cults and stuff. Spirituality is another form that often occurs within this cycle of power and control and domestic violence, where I think it's worth calling out as well. If, you can get pulled in and gripped and hooked through religion.
Yeah, I just read a really good memoir. I know the subline is like My Escape from the Christian Patriarchy. And it was really fascinating. Tia Levings, I think, is the author. And it was just really interesting to, it was all domestic violence, but it had that spiritual cults component as well to it. And, you are subservient to your husband, and he is the head of the household. I mean, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of men fall into that misinterpretation, I think, sometimes of scriptures of like, that I have to be the one to run this household, when the reality is this is a partnership, right? And there are different things we all bring to the table, and there's a balanced, healthy way we need to do that.
Right.
Good luck having that conversation all the time in the Bible Belt. It doesn't always go over very well.
Right.
But I saw this thing on the internet the other day that I thought was atrocious, where it was like a pastor who's up in front of his congregation, and he's coming clean, right? Like giving a full disclosure, and makes no mention that the whole time these things that he's confessing to were with a minor.
Oh,
right.
lovely.
And then she's there, and she speaks out, and because like everyone's hugging him and thanking him, but then it comes out in that moment that he's talking about someone who was a minor.
Oh, wow.
And this is just kind of the atrocious stuff that happens day to day.
Yeah.
It's happening right now.
Well, and we have a PhD program where I work, and there's a lot of students who are doing research on religious trauma, and that's becoming something that is becoming more and more researched, and we're learning a lot more about is religious trauma that's going on, whether it's saving yourself for marriage, kind of sexuality beliefs, or the subservient aspect to it. So it's all very interesting.
Yeah. I'm all for church. I go to church. I'm all
Same.
for these things, and but I always joke with my clients, like, I learned more about spirituality from degenerate 12-steppers than I ever did in a church. I learned more about how to get on my knees and pray from someone who had experienced desperation than from someone who had everything going right at church. And that's neither here nor there. That was just my journey, but it's there's a practicality to spirituality that I always like, which is your relationship with your higher power is your path.
Right.
No one gets to tell you how to do that.
Yeah, my dad is a minister, so he probably wouldn't appreciate me saying I learned more outside of the church than in the church, but it's been a good I'm part of a very progressive denomination, Disciples of Christ, and so it's been a very good fit for a lot of my beliefs, and it's been a natural fit for that. So
Yeah, well, c'est la vie, right? It's like being a therapist. There's a flow to understanding with these realms, and we're always inviting a lot of different beliefs into. And,
yeah,
and what's funny is, like, I don't know about you, but that's always actually given me a stronger sense of my connection with God, you know, than really
I see
anything
that.
else ever did.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was in my undergrad, you know, learning about social work, spirituality and religion was something that we were taught don't talk about with clients,
Yeah.
right? That is their, you know, own personal beliefs. That's not something that, you know, you need to get involved in. And then it has kind of significantly evolved into, okay, well, if we're working with the whole person, that is
Yeah.
part of who they are.
Yeah.
And the person in their environment kind of mentality. And so it's really been, you know, a huge, you know, at least for me, it's been a huge shift in thinking about working with people who want to incorporate some kind of spirituality element to their therapeutic process. So
Yeah.
it's been interesting.
Yeah.
hmm
I have a question that I ask everyone when they're new on the show. I've prepped you a little bit.
Yeah, thank
But-
goodness.
If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride, what would the ride be and what would you name it?
Okay, mental health amusement park. And I had to build a ride. So I would probably build something family friendly that, you know, families can go on together, because I am all about, you know, kind of working as the family unit kind of thing. So, you know, maybe like a fun water ride, or, you know, a fun cars ride or something like that. And then what would I name it? I have no idea. If my daughter heard that I got to pick a name for a ride and I didn't say Rainbow Sparkles, she would be very upset. So I'm gonna go with Rainbow Sparkles. We're just gonna
Okay.
call it Rainbow Sparkles Ride.
I dig it.
There you go.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
While you have a captive audience, any last things that you would like to just kind of round out, share with them? It could be on intimate partner violence or anything else that you'd like to share with our audience here.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I always want people to know is that there's help out there for you, that you're not alone in this. That's the biggest thing that I always want survivors to know. For kind of everybody, I always love saying, and I imagine your audience knows this, but therapy is for everyone. And I think everybody needs therapy at some point in their lives, and that's a healthy thing to have and to do and to talk about with someone. So get yourself a good therapist.
Yeah. It's also a good barometer for finding a healthy partner.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, this could be one of those red flags. Like, do you go to therapy? No.
Yeah, right. That should be like a, you know, dating profile. I go to therapy kind of thing that you look for. A green flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Alicia Hawley Bernardez.
Thank you.
We break the cycle here every Friday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. You will see us here next week with another guest, and we look forward to seeing you then. Take care.
Awesome.